We are Ann Arbor's talk station, 1290 WLBY and the LucyAnn Lance Show. And our content also podcast on LucyAnnLance.com, LucyAnnLance.com. Don't forget about our app. You can get that at the App Store and iTunes, as well as iHeartRadio. And put us on whatever device you like. The LucyAnn Lance Show, and our producer is Elise Shea, our webmaster Jacob Bodner, and my business partner Dean Erskine with Lance and Erskine Communications. Each week we have our great friend Damian Farrell, who's a local architect with Damian Farrell Design Group, and his segment, Damian on Design. And for the last few weeks, we've been focusing on Michigan as a state of design, really introducing you to the men and women behind design here throughout the ages in Michigan.
Yeah.
It's been a lot of fun.
Fascinating, hasn't it?
I think so.
We've learned a lot and seen a lot and got some great anecdotes. And today's one that's very special to me, very personal to me. Yeah.
And that is because we are going to be talking a lot about a man who was your mentor in your field and really played a great role in your life, and that is?
Karl Johnson, one of the founders of Johnson, Johnson & Roy. And we have one of JJR's longtime employees here today as our guest, but if it weren't for Karl, I wouldn't be in this country. You know, this is one of these things where life takes strange turns. And so having worked with Karl in South Africa as a student from 1979 to 83, I find myself traveling backwards and forwards to a place that back then, when I looked on the map, I referred to as Ann Arbor in Michigan, because I didn't know any better. So my work with him is what brought me to Ann Arbor. Just, you know, one chance design competition in South Africa, one chance hiring a planning firm from anywhere in the world, and JJR coming out on the top of that selection list, and a friendship formed in South Africa between a brilliant man and a young student that went on to be not just a mentorship, but really a father figure for me.
And we lost him last year?
We lost him last year.
He was one of three principals in this firm, and let's bring in Neal Kessler, who is a landscape architect with which is now known as SmithGroupJJR.
Right.
Nice to have you with us as well.
Thanks, Neal. Appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
How did your firm begin?
Well, it was the three of them, as you mentioned. It was Karl Johnson and
Right.
Bill Johnson and third, Clarence Roy. And it actually started with Bill Johnson, and he was a professor of landscape architecture at the University of Michigan. And he had been working with students to come up with a master plan, or planning for the university. And pretty soon he understood that this was something different, and he went to the Board of Regents and asked them if he could do a master plan for the university. And lo and behold, they let him, and that was sort of the genesis of that. And so the three of them got together, started working on this, and that's really it.
Yeah, it was back in
1961.
Which was a special year, right? A good year for wines, LucyAnn?
Yes, definitely.
And some of us were born that year. We won't say who.
The plan itself, is it still in effect today?
Well, it is. They have followed it remarkably well. What was different about that plan. Previous master plans had really concentrated very much on architecture, and this plan really looked at the space between the buildings, right? How campus is actually used, the open spaces, how people connections between parts of campus, how people actually use it rather than the buildings themselves.
Right.
And so they came up with what they called a framework plan. It was a real flexible plan. It didn't, where if they didn't build a building right where we said they should, it was okay, right? Because it was flexible enough where things could change, and so they did this, and they have really followed that plan quite remarkably well over the years.
Three brilliant men too, really, but they split up. Well, Bill and Karl split a long time ago. Bill left the JJR group, went out on his own.
He did. It was, what was interesting about that is that that he went to become the dean of the School of Natural Resources at the University of Michigan.
Okay.
And so he was called to do that, to lead that program. And then when he came back, he actually did come back to JJR, but felt like he had been away for too long, didn't know a lot of the people as well, and so he decided to go off on his own.
Yeah. But those two I knew best, Karl obviously, but beautiful hand in drawing, both artists as well as planners and visionaries, and the extraordinary ability to work with large groups of people, incredible consensus building. Like my first evidence ever of designing in a group, of what we now call charretting, I guess, of gathering people, gathering ideas, storyboarding, all those sorts of words that have now become everyday things. It was stuff that they were doing a long time ago. It was brilliant. It was just fantastic to watch it.
Yeah, Karl was had an amazing hand. We put a sketchbook together of his sketches for his memorial service. And it was, these sketches he put together when he'd go to England, and they were just beautiful. And the great thing is that what he would also do is he had this way of what he called conversational graphics.
Right.
So he wanted to, with the client, wanted to sketch with them while they were talking. And then by the time they were finished talking, they would discover something together. And then he would give them the sketch. And he tells a story of, he was great friends with Governor Milliken and former University of Michigan presidents.
In fact, but Karl and Janet, on most of these trips of these sketches to England, these trips were done for the most part with the Millikens. So they were very close friends. So Governor and Helen Milliken were around for most of these
This work
trips.
is just
Isn't it gorgeous?
absolutely
I mean, he
beautiful.
taught me to draw. If I look at my drawing style,
Taught me to draw as well.
there's
In
the
particular, I love the
yeah.
people that he did.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, they look like a master painter.
Oh,
Yeah.
he truly is. I mean, he's the watercolors he does. There's only a few examples of the watercolors in the little sketchbook, but he was a real master of watercolor, and he was a poet. He really
was.
loved. He brought poetry. He loved Keats and Yeats and all the Tennyson and he'd bring all of that into his work, and so it's he has these beautiful journals where he's writing about his experiences, which we've also captured in that little book.
It's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
How did what he did, when I'm looking in this book, translate to the, in particular, the University of Michigan?
Well, he, again, it was this idea of seeing a place in a little different manner. So looking at it from a different angle, understanding the land, understanding what the land gives you first, and then overlaying the social aspects, the context, and then only after that really thinking about the buildings. And so he would go and he would, by sketching by hand, he really get the feel of a place. And so, for instance, at the University of Michigan, he would sit, and just by sitting, and it's different than taking a photograph, he would be able to sketch and really see a lot of things that you would normally not see. And so that would translate into new ways of seeing things and new ways of thinking about them.
In the book that was handed out at his funeral, Karl Johnson mentored and inspired countless students, designers, colleagues, and clients throughout his life. He preached sustainability and respect for God's creation, and was at the forefront of his field in designing landscapes that sought to further the special relationship between man and nature.
I couldn't think of better words. That really, the project I worked with him on in South Africa Enterprise was a 500-acre site in a beautiful valley, all natural bush, as we called it. There was a riverine bush that was very dense, large tropical plants, large leaf stuff, things that he really hadn't had much chance to work with, and loved it. We did a chapel in a bamboo grove together, where we tied the tops of these huge bamboos together to create a sense of shelter, and perched on a waterfall, and then we did buildings together and a chapel out in a pond. And just walking with him, I learned so much. And he could walk too. Short guy, and his legs would just go like heck, and I walk fast, and I could never keep up with him. And he was just pointing and talking, and look at this, look at that, and he kept it all in his head. And then we did these, and I mentioned this to you, Neal, a little bit, that I had an experience with him where we sat across the table with a roll of tracing paper and the whole group at African Enterprise. And we were designing or talking about locating and designing this conference center on the site. And that's exactly, it was, you know, I've mentioned Tim Brown a number of times, who's the CEO of IDEO. Tim talks about design thinkers. Karl was a design thinker. And so was Bill, so was Clarence. But focusing on his work and what I did with him. And we sat with this roll of tracing paper on a long table, and he started a sketch on one side, and I was sketching on the other side, just sort of following along, and he was saying, capture this, capture that. And we had half a dozen people walking around us. And this thing evolved from drawings over the site plan, and evolved, and at the end, I think it was about 24 feet of tracing paper. There was a building. And so it was the most extraordinary process I've ever been a part of, and it just wowed me.
Wow.
Just wowed me. It was incredible.